Where do I go from the first act? Nowhere, okay? I can't do what was done on the stage here earlier. But what I want to do with you for the next 40 minutes, though, is slightly different, okay? I want you to engage with me. Now you're a little bit awake, or a bit more awake, so you can do so. You have your paddles available to you. So let's do the following, if you want. I wouldn't call it a game, but an interaction, okay? I'll give you a question. I'll try to gauge back from you your response to that question, okay? Feel free to be frank there. That's fine. That's great. Then I'll give you some facts that I think are pertinent relating to that question. And afterwards, I'll postulate for you or give you a thesis, like a statement of what I believe is important about that topic and how I think about that. And then you can use again your paddles to vote whether you agree with me or not. It's not my objective to convince you that I am right. I'm not so sure myself how much right I am. But my objective is to give you some points of thinking about the future. Now, when we talk about the key topic here about borders come in different forms and shapes, yes? I mean, there are physical borders that we cross, goods cross, customers cross. These we call traditional exports and imports. There are other forms of borders as well. There are cultural borders. A lot of you trading across the physical borders recognize that there are cultures involved which are different as well. The more we become data and technology intensive in terms of what we do in consumer services and retail services, generally in finance, for example, that I work in a lot, the more we recognize that the other borders matter more than physical borders themselves. So I'll talk about those borders. In a way, also, I'll talk about seasonality. Except not the seasonality you heard about, which is very important seasonality to you on an everyday basis, but a seasonality you can think of in terms of longer-term investment, longer-term developments in your sector, seasonality which is what we call in economics cycles. So some of the cycles can be very short. In finance, we deal with cycles which are nanosecond short sometimes. Sometimes I deal with my clients with cycles which are 50, 60, 70 years long, intergenerational cycles. I see clients who ask for things like, my great-grandchildren, when they inherit the wealth, I want them to have X, okay, in relation to what I have today. And that cycle is very long, so you start thinking about things like global warming, for example, and all of a sudden that enters as well. So anyway, so think about it as cycles and borders as well. So should we start? Okay. Let me give you the first question. Should your company, in your view, trade actively, I don't mean just stepping in and trying the ground and trying the water, but trade actively in Middle East, North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, and emerging and developing Asia? Give me yes or no. Okay, well, I mean, I'd say it's a fairly even split. And it's actually a split which is, to me, reflective of the perception out there. Some of those markets are what we call difficult, uncomfortable, especially if we come from the Western markets or developed markets, okay? In particular, markets like MENA, some political uncertainty, some political risks and things like that can push us away from those markets. Sub-Saharan Africa, very interesting market, yes? In itself, it's a market which some of us associate with low consumer power, consumer purchasing power, but at the same time, there are positives as well there. Difficult market to trade in logistically, okay? Emerging and developing Asia, another logistical sometimes nightmare, another difficulty in terms of differences in culture and everything else. Let me give you some facts here. I'll give you facts from the top. Whether we look at the GDP per capita growth, whether we look at the GDP per capita adjusted for the differences in prices and consumer baskets growth, or the actual raw GDP growth, there is a question right now around us, yes? We're just coming out of the Great Recession. We're just coming out of the big crisis. Are we going back to the new normal? The new normal which would be consistent with the past rapid rates of growth in the economy worldwide, similar distribution of growth across the different sectors. These are your future consumers that we're asking about. Will they have the power to consume? Will they have the power to demand more? Unfortunately, when I look at the 1990s through 2007, right to the end of the period of the expansion, the past rates of growth are not going to be replicated in the future. These are the forecasts for the next 5 years from the IMF. They're very much consistent with the World Bank. They're very much consistent with the markets forecasts and market participants forecasts. So treat it as approximately the truth. And the truth is that we don't expect the world economy to grow as fast as before. We're in a structural slowdown. Something is happening in the economy which is slowing down growth and therefore the purchasing power and demand as well. What's more interesting is that that slowdown comes on foot of already slow growth in the advanced economies. This is our comfort zone. This is where we compete on a day-to-day basis. And things are not moving there. The good news there is consumers are still wealthy. They're still going to be able to afford things. The bad news is they're not going to be spending a hell of a lot more, and they're not going to be spending in terms of the purchasing of the new goods and new services at the increasing rate. This is the market which you're comfortable perhaps with, but it's not the market where you want to be if you are to capture growth opportunities. In growth opportunities, there are several interesting points here. Commonwealth of Independent States, which is primarily Russia in this case, is really not very promising right now. Something really is happening there which is holding back that rapid rate of growth from the past. It's not going to the old normal. Latin America is another one. It was underperformer in the global growth in the period of 1990 through 2007, and it is going to be an underperformer compared to the global growth in the future as well. We had a lot of hope for that region, and that hope is not exactly anymore there, really. It's not materializing. Instead, where the growth is, as I said in the question, MENA, emerging and developing Asia, and sub-Saharan Africa. And what's very interesting about all those three regions are the two things. Yes, there is still a slowdown there as well, compared to the pre-crisis growth rates. Yes, consumers are not going to be growing in terms of their purchasing power as fast there as well. But very promising thing about it is that it is growing on foot of the emerging middle classes and upper middle classes. And these are the people with a huge consumption power and huge acceleration in consumption power. Sub-Saharan Africa in the 1990s grew on the foot of the aggregate economy expansion and population growth. In other words, consumers were getting richer and wealthier, but they were not getting wealthier and richer very fast. We expect that to change. We expect that to actually accelerate and consumers to acquire more and more power. So, with this in mind, let me give you the first thesis of mine. And that basically says that if you want to address the challenges of structurally slower growth, you should be in the regions of MENA, Sub-Saharan Africa, and emerging and developing Asia. So now, do you agree with me or not? Oh, okay, well, I convinced few of you, but I still didn't convince some of you. Those whom I didn't convince, can any one of you just give me, like, shout out, you know, why? Why do you still think that these regions are not where you should be? Yeah, go.
I think logistics will be one big challenge.
Okay.
And security will be another challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And processes being in place, that will be the biggest thing. Because whilst within Europe you can do those things legally.
Yes.
But that will be a big challenge in Middle East and Asia.
Okay. It's a very good point, and I think it's a very solid point. These are all the fears that we face when we go into those new markets. Some of those points are being a little bit overplayed in our kind of, if you want, perception of those regions. When we look at the quality of governance in many of those regions, it actually is on par with what we call middle-income economies. No, it's not quite as good as the likes of, say, Chile, but it is very good compared to some other areas like, say, Korea, Taiwan, and areas that we are comfortable with already. Especially that is true in the emerging Asia. So the barriers to trade in there, which are regulatory, which are security of property rights, those are kind of becoming less and less important over time. So if that's holding you back, you should be thinking about changing that perception. There are ways of also entering those markets which actually allow you huge capacity to play off those weaknesses. So joint venturing, for example, in those areas is a strong way of protecting your property rights, ability to get paid, ability to expatriate payments. Risk of expatriation of payments, for example, which we thought would have been totally kosher in the likes of Europe. Well, we can look at the capital controls in Iceland. We can look at capital controls which were in place up until recently in Cyprus. We can think about capital controls which might be coming in, and most likely coming in Greece. All of a sudden, the risks that were associated before with the areas that we didn't want to trade in are now coming into the areas where we actually are trading. So that's a little bit also offsets. Logistics, I'll talk about logistics. I think it's a very important issue, okay? And actually, well, let me not hold it. So let me ask you a second question then, okay? And the second question is, in your view, should your company deploy advanced technologies, early stage technologies like 3D printing, for example, and wearables, in order to drive your market differentiation from your competitors? So give me yes, green, no. Yes, a lot of yeses. That's predominantly yes. Well, I think we have a selection bias here. Since you are clients of Google, you would be into technology. The question is, of course, what I mean by that question itself. What do I mean by using these technologies? A lot of us think about wearables as the marketing platforms, yes? As delivery of information and interaction in terms of information, of us pushing information to the customer, okay? That's slightly different from what I'm thinking about. But let me perhaps reinforce your view of that, or perhaps try to change some of your views who are not into technology yet. Let's look at the Gardner Curve, which basically maps the relationship between the stage of maturity of technology, how much we know about technology, how much we can deploy it, and how much we are ready to actually use that technology already, given our business systems and strategies and the likes, relative to the business value that that technology adds, or rather the expectation that we have of that technology adding this business value. It's a kind of a curve, it's a cycle, you can see that, yes? Early on at the bottom over there, what you have is the technology which holds huge promise, but we have no idea really what it is, how to use it yet, and where we can use it. From there on, that technology acquires very rapid rate of growth in terms of the value it adds to the businesses and to the economy. Thereafter, it peaks when our expectations exceed the capacity of technology really to deliver. The bubble develops, yes? And the bubble collapses, okay? And we go into this despair about technology. We almost forget about it. We think about it as, oh, this is just steam engine, yes? But hey, steam engines still exist in one form or another, okay? And they kind of go back to their life and they stay on this flat curve, delivering a stable, steady rate of return, whether in output or in productivity and things like that. That's what we call kind of commodities or industrial development stage, or maybe we can call it the utilities, okay? Boring sectors, okay? So let's look at some of the technologies we have right now. Cloud computing, everybody talks about it. Everyone knows what it can do for us. We pretty much have ability to wire it right now. There is no surprise in it. Despite the fact that most of the media likes talking about it as something really pioneer and new, it's not. It's on a decline. We're overhyping it sometimes. It still has very strong potential to deliver, but it's on a downward trajectory. Big data. Big data is, everybody loves big data. Google loves big data, sorry guys, okay? I don't. I think we're overhyping it as well. It gives us a lot of aggregates, but not enough particulates. And what I will talk down the road about is actually small data is much better than the big data. But anyways, let's not preempt that. Congestion charges, this is the Uberized economy. A lot can be happening there, very interesting technology itself. Can you use congestion charges type approach in your stores? Well, you already do, yes? In retail and consumer services, the peak pricing happens around the peak of demand. You try to coincide it with, yes? And then you have the discounts. Consumers adjust. In my household, we don't buy Christmas gifts. We buy post-Christmas gifts. Okay? It's also primarily linked because we travel after Christmas a lot, so we have an opportunity to actually buy outside of area where we live, so it gives us more variation and all. Integrated and smart technologies, very promising, but also somewhat, we know what they can do. We just don't yet necessarily know how they're going to do it all, but we do know what they can do. Here's the interesting ones, the ones which are still arising, nanotechnology and the 3D printing. Now, 3D printing, to me, I mentioned it in the question, yes, is really the transitionary stage. It's transitionary stage to something else, what we call 4D printing, which combines robotized production on a unique execution plan and the unique design, which is what 3D printing is, with materials properties. So in other words, you use a 3D type of printing or the robotized technology to produce something which changes its property as you use it, depending on conditions in which you use it. It's a very interesting area of development right now. It promises a lot. It promises to change the properties, for example, of fabrics used in apparel. It promises to change the properties of the car parts, depending on the climate in which you drive the cars and things like that. Biointerfaces, fantastic stuff. This week, actually, interestingly enough, 2 announcements in biointerfaces. The first one is vagus nerve stimulation, which allows effectively a mind control. Not your mind being controlled, but your mind controlling something, okay? There's a group of Russian researchers who have already tested this technology, so it's not something woo out there. It actually is working, where they can use the nanotechnological implants which can control appliances. So you can use your brain to control your TV, okay? No more of those different controllers and things like that as well. There is some other research in that area as well happening. Most of that is happening right now in medicine, in health. But soon it's going to have a direct interaction with your consumers, with your customers, in the traditional sectors of retail and the likes. So where's traditional retail is and consumer services? It's far away from the innovation curve. You think you're using a lot of new technology, but over the last 15, 20 years, the real revolution in retail hasn't happened in use of technologies in retail. It happened in logistics and supply chain management. So your challenge is two-step. The first step is you have to move yourself closer to the real innovation curve. For that, you have some of the things that you already deploy, such as e-payments, facilitation of transactions, and things like that. Some of the things you are already doing without knowing that you are doing, such as localization of your brand offers, which can be culturally anchored, which can be demand anchored, income anchored as well. Okay? Think of the Maserati's response to the changes in the market post the crisis. What did they do first? Did they produce a new supercar? No, they produced a cheaper version of the car. Okay? Big data design, that's something you are probably already starting to do, but not yet doing exactly fully, okay? Big manufacturers do that, big retailers do that, smaller ones don't. You're gonna have to start doing that as well. And you have the use of wearables. Wearables not just to deliver as a platform your message to the customers, not just for marketing and communications, but actually to collect data from them, to understand what influences their demand, but also on top of everything, wearables as integrated into your offer, if you're in apparel, footwear, and the likes, or consumer goods, durable consumer goods, and the rest of it as well. Your bigger challenge is to move yourself ahead of that curve, to become the innovation sector. You all sound like you're innovation sector because you all support the idea of advanced technologies use, but you need to get there. And to get there, you have to think about the brands becoming not just localized, but atomized, personalized, bespoke, truly bespoke. It's the most abused word, bespoke, today in the kind of retail and fashion industry itself. Small data will influence that because small data is me, my data. I personally tell you what I want, when I want it, and how I want it. And I tell you how much I'm willing to pay for it. You execute, you deliver, and you guarantee. So you establish trusted relationship with me. I give you my ideas and my demand. Personalized logistics, very important here in that context, and we already mentioned logistics as being important in general. 4D printing and materials incorporation at the advanced stage, very important as well. And biopersonal integration or biointerfaces integration down the road is another opportunity for you. So when I'm talking about technologies, advanced technologies, I tricked you a little bit. I said about wearables, yes, and the 3D printing. That's where you should be anyways now. Where you should be heading is all the way down there, beyond those technologies. So with that, let me give you my view of that. The technological innovation provides you a definitive competitive advantage in the future. But technological innovation, not just in capturing trends and what consumer wants, but enabling consumer to want more and to want differently and interact with you differently as well. So do you agree with me on that or not? Excellent. I say I reduced the reds by about a factor of 10, which is a good result. Thanks for that. Okay, let's move on swimmingly. Now, logistics. This is a good question there for you. In your view, will technology be the main enabler of your business logistics? Yes or no? Oh, predominantly yes. And this was a trick question. No. Solidly no. Excellent. Those of you who said no, you're correct. In my view, of course. Remember, my view is somewhat subjective, yes? But here's the objective stuff. What do we know about new technology? We know everything about new technology that we need to know. Not only that, the new technology with all its quirks and problems and everything else, all these drone delivery, this is very promising, it's great. But you can integrate it now into your business model without sweating. Why? Because it's just another different pickup truck. There's no difference. Your warehouses are suited for it. The thing which is not suited is the actual drone delivery system itself. Yes, why? Because you need to have relay stations. But that is not about new technology. Relay stations are as old as coaches. They used to have relay stations, yes? You remember Wells Fargo Bank, Wells Fargo coaches, the postal and banking delivery system in the United States by horses? Yeah, it's the same as drones. This is why it is known. There's no miracle in that. That's not a differentiator for you. Other new tech, the known unknown, the exciting new tech about the biointerfaces, nanotechnologies, about the ability to wire programming into our brains, nervous systems, and everything else, that's not about delivery. That's not about logistics as such. Not a hell of a lot of promise there from logistics as well, though it is exciting, but it's not really about that. So what is exciting? Old tech. Boring old tech. Yeah, this is exciting old tech, yes? The blimps, the dirigibles, one of the most efficient ways of delivery of goods. We're going to have to go back to them, but let's forget that. That's secondary. That there is very interesting. Who knows what that is? Anybody? Yes, Silk Route. What is Silk Route? Dumb old technology of trucks rolling down the same tarmac. The rumbling trains going along the same rails. And yes, along the line, the relay stations for the drones. And yes, along the line, the manufacturing capacity, new manufacturing abilities, new design centers, new consumers, everything else. Why is it the unknown? It is unknown because the size of that project, the daring of that project, is something that 10 years ago we could not have imagined. It is only becoming possible because a group of governments, a group of visionary governments around the world, whom we don't associate with visionaries, sat down, set aside a hell of a lot of problems between themselves, and decided that that's a good idea. The catalyst for it is China. This week, again, China just gave 300 million loan, the first loan under the Silk Route project, to Turkmenistan. That is happening. That is exciting. It's exciting on many levels. It's exciting on the levels that it reproduces centuries-old technology of the Silk Route in today's context. It creates a platform, an app platform, on which you can add all of the new technologies from drones to Elon Musk's, tubes, everything else, whatever flies, walks, swims, goes, can go there. That's the real enabler. Which brings us to the real barrier, to the real boundary, yes? And that is also in a dumb technology, old technology. It's a technology of the state systems in managing the borders. That's really old. So I work in investment markets. To me, the exciting investment is the one which nobody yet made. If everyone is in the market, here and here, that's boring. The rates of return are low. Either that or possibly negative if they all are overhyping it. If I'm really investor, I want to be here and I want to be here. Why? Because that's where the big change will have to happen. That's where most of the productivity from that change in logistics is going to happen. So it's not about new technology. It's about the oldest technologies possible being used in a different way. It's about strategic innovation rather than pure technological design and innovation. So let me give you my view of that. Technology, in my view, is keeping up the pace with the demand in logistics. It's the government systems which are wanting in that. And therefore, the biggest change to your logistics chains is going to come from the government systems, from altering that. How you do that is different. How do we facilitate it is difficult. But that's where the real future lies. So, do you agree with that or not? Okay, good. That's excellent. I'm doing my job. Those who disagree, anybody, give me an idea. Why? Why do you still think that Technology is not keeping the pace in your view, or is it that the biggest bang for the buck is not going to happen in the government services?
I think it's creating that balance where whilst we're still doing.
Just speak to it.
I think it's just creating that balance whilst most of, like in this group, 90% people still think, I agree with you on traditional methods of transportation and logistics. But we still need some of the people in that group that goes actually and challenge the norms and bring those things to those stages, and we still need some businesses, some people, some organizations actually who go beyond that and bring those technologies to that stage where actually those are applicable and becomes a traditional method, and then majority and most people start adopting those things.
I can't disagree with that. Yes, we need the early adopters. And first we need the visionaries to generate that change. But what I'm saying is that most of the vision is already there. The early adopters are going to come. And in logistics space, it's really the ability of the new system to integrate with the existing system which drives the adaptability of it, okay? And in a way, the technologies that we see coming in online right now are fully integratable today. There is no difference in terms of using, for example, drone delivery systems, or even more robotics in terms of the supply chain management, more software applications in supply chain management. That's not categorical shift. It's not real categorical enabler of different way of business. So you don't even need new adopters for it, early adopters. It's going to be, once it is feasible cost-wise, it becomes automatically adopted. The real new beginning, the real, if you want, early adopters will have to happen in the governments. You're going to have along this route, new Silk Route, the governments will very quickly come to realization that one of the big issues that they're facing is that while they deregulated and opened up the market for movement of physical goods across the borders, they didn't deregulate necessarily yet the services. And so their next step is probably going to be looking into how do you have the globally trading platform like internet, like web, okay, and the mobile applications and all that, and yet you have the national level taxation systems, customs clearance systems, and the rest of that, which create the boundaries for it. Think about in services, about half of the services traded internationally are actually involving the customer physically moving across the border to the service provider, okay? Think about passport systems and passport controls today. All of those countries have very rigorous and very complicated Byzantine systems of the visas and travel restrictions. If they truly want to trade, they're going to have to start breaking it up. That's much more pioneering than taking a drone delivery company and integrating its services into delivery of your goods to your customers. That's no brainer. That's easy. Maybe I'm overhyping it, but anyways. So let's switch to something else. Let me ask you about the aging patterns and the patterns of your consumers. We all know about the aging demographics. We all know about the challenge of that. Do you think that aging demographic will radically, and I've stressed that, radically, significantly transform your industry, your sector, retail and consumer services? It's pretty even, surprisingly, between yes and no, and kind of borders on the side of no. So you don't think it is a radical transformation. I think it is a radical transformation, very radical transformation, and that's because behind it there is more than aging going on. Let me show you 3 points in time. Up to 2020, aging of the labor force is starting to impact us already. Germany, Italy, Germany actually before Italy, Japan, Russia, those economies currently have shrinking labor forces because of aging. That's the aging demographic. Beyond that, by about 2035, the problem starts impacting the areas that we think of as being young economies demographically, okay? We're looking at the Central, Latin America, China and Asia. We're looking at the MENA, we're looking at South Africa, we're looking even at Australia. where you have that problem, where the balance between the younger workers and the older age workers in the labor force starts tilting towards the older age workers. By 2050, the problem is truly global. Okay? All we know that. But what we don't really pay attention to is that the aging is only the first stage of that process and the first challenge in that process. And that is happening now. So if you think that you need to radically transform in the future, wake up. You have to radically transform now for aging. But beyond aging, there is a challenge even bigger rests, which links to aging. When we become older, even if we stay in the labor force, we become less productive. Hey, I know by myself, I used to work 20 hours a day totally fine. Now I need about 50 espressos in the process to sustain myself, okay? So that problem here is more than trivial for you, because the goods and services you are delivering today will have to start addressing the relationship between the age of your clients, not just preferences for color and the length of, say, for example, pants or shorts and the shape of the blazers or the shape of the cars, but actually how do they become more productive using the goods that you supply. That challenge we have no idea how to address yet. And that's coming up very soon. Beyond that, the both aging and productivity challenges become intertwined and fully interconnected into this whole challenge of longevity and enablement. You have to enable people to live longer, better, and be more productive in their longer lives. Believe me, we have no idea how to do that. And that is on a global scale. But let me bring you back to today. This is the survey done by Pew Research about a couple of months ago, globally. And this is a sample for you. Even in today's demographic, which is not aging, we're talking about 40-year-olds, my generation, okay? Middle-aged generation is already sandwiched financially, and therefore our productivity and time constraints-wise and everything else, between two generational peaks, between our children who are staying longer with us, and we have to fund longer, subsidize them longer in their life, and our parents who are becoming older and more reliant on us for help, financial help, with health, with the mobility, with the longevity and quality of life as well. We're being squeezed on both ends now. So you think that this is not radical change there? Look at the United States. This is a society where 18-year-old normally traditionally used to leave the house and go to college and never return back to live in the house of the parents, where the elderly had the social security and the ability to fund themselves in the retirement and have access through social security linked healthcare provision by the state to very good healthcare. 47% of the households in the United States in the middle-aged category are devoting more and more their resources to subsidizing both ends of the generational gap between them. It's a big problem. And if it's a big problem, there is a big issue there, of course. My view is that aging will radically alter the links between your consumer demand, the economic growth, productivity, and it will require dramatic reshaping of the retail sector overall and consumer services sector in general. Anyways, let me skip the voting bit here because we're going to move to the opposite side of that generational issue. Here's a next question for you relating to demographic. Is your business prepared for the widening generational gap between today's consumers and the incoming new generation of decennials, not millennials? So what do you say, yes or no? Are you prepared for it? Good. Majority are no. And you know why I'm saying good? Because I think you are realistic in that context. Because that gap is now wider than it ever has been before. And it's getting deeper and wider as we go on. Why? Let me give you a couple of trends very quickly. XY generations, yes? You know what these images are, yes? There. This is the new Amazon buttons, yes? The enablement of me to buy the predictable brand at predictable time without giving it too much thought and hopefully at the price-sensitive entry. When I need it without thinking. It's convenience shopping, yes? This is what the XYers are. They like known brands, they defined by them because they have trust to a brand, to the marketing platform, established trust, yes? They value convenience of access. They're price sensitive. They're crucially footfall anchored. What does it mean? It means if I have a shop on a high street and the ex-wire passes by my shop, stops by, comes in, asks for a service for something, I screw up. Didn't have a good morning. My coffee was terrible on the way. Yes, don't feel good, you know. I was rude to the customer. The customer walks away. That's bad news, but it's not terrible news because these people are footfall anchored. They're going to pass with high likelihood by my shop again, and I'll have another chance of pitching them. And I'll have another chance of making it right, correcting it. That's crucial. Why? Because they're anchored to a particular area. They're moving between the particular area where they work and where they live and where they play. You know, it's fairly finite and well-defined. They have concentrated demand as a result of that. Their demand for lunches is concentrated about their work location. Their demand for dinners is concentrated about their entertainment location. And their demand for, I don't know, breakfast is concentrated, well, okay, usually around their bedroom or, you know, their kitchen. Okay. Millennials, this is the new kind of generation which is currently gaining power in the marketplace. They're more into the distribution of kind of design and brands. They're a bit more fleeting. They're less anchored to anything. They have more of a regional identity rather than a very localized identity. Okay? They're very demanding, but they're really powerless. Why are they powerless? Because they ain't got income growth potential. Because they're being squeezed on both sides by their elderly parents and their children coming up. And they're going to be squeezed even more by the taxmen, who are going to have to pay even more for the elderly parents and the likes. They're very fleeting in their attitudes, and they believe that they're very fast in their decision making, but they're not. They confuse the speed of internet that they're using for the speed of their decision making. We know that from behavioral studies. Okay? They have this image of themselves as being really sharp, really fast, really not loyal, but they're not quite. And there's a new generation coming in. That's my kids, decennials. They're demanding and they are going to be empowered. Because by the time they are in the prime of their workforce age, we're going to be so old that even with your help, no one can extract any productivity from us. So their labor is going to be at a huge premium. They will have zero loyalty. They already have zero loyalty. They have no loyalty for anything, okay? They have no brand loyalty either, by the way. They are fleetingly fast on demand. They really move with the speed of internet that they're using. It's scary. The rate of volatility in them is really scary in terms of their decision-making preferences and likes. They're anchored to experience and they're not anchored physically to any location. They don't go to local shops. They don't care for it. They're split referencing in the sense that they have a difference between the objective judgment and the subjective preference. And they're very acutely aware of that difference. Why? Because what I would call them, they're data naturals. So in that world, this decennial generation is so categorically different between X, Y's. And the middle generation of millennials is falling through. You really have to bridge that gap. And that is a radically different gap than in previous transitions of generations, where things changed, but they didn't change radically. They didn't change that much. Okay? Here they're going to change in such a way that because these people are not location anchored, the whole idea of the location, city, region, country, home, definitions of themselves as being geographically linked to anything is going to disappear. They're going to be expats par excellence. So here's my thesis about the second part of the generational divide, yes? It is that the decennials have the wider gap to the current generations and deeper gap than any other one in the history. And as a result of that, you have to have an explicit strategy as a retail and consumer services provider to bridge that gap. And this is different than the challenges you faced before, because now you have the agent and you have the decennials on the other end coming in. So how many of you would agree with that now? Okay, so I did my convincing. I think I'm not running out of time, so I have a chance to talk to you about trust capital. This is a very important thing. So for a difference, this is not a question, this is a statement for you, a definition. I define myself, trust capital, as the stock of tools, systems, and values that enable a brand to fully partner with their customer. Now, there's several loaded statements in there. Partner in what way? Hold on a second, I'll explain. So let's do the question. Should your company invest in trust capital? Yes or no? Good, we're on the same wavelength. I think trust capital is one of the most important forms of capital coming up, especially on the foot of the relationship between the older generation and the decennials. Older generation will be less capable of making a lot of decisions. So they need to have a trust in you to enable them making those decisions. Younger generation is very fast and is based on trust. So you need to make sure that they have full confidence in you. Younger generation is also going to be your partners. Let me explain to you how. So let's look at the world that I'm comfortable with, finance. The speed in finance today is, it's like the speed of light. We already have switches operating on the physical exchanges, physical wires, at 2/3 of the speed of light. That's what we call high-frequency trading. I teach that in Trinity, okay? It's fascinating stuff, but that's not the cutting edge in finance. Cutting edge in finance is actually an ability to take a smaller insights, not necessarily at very high speed, and extract higher quality analysis out of them. I can talk about that for hours, and indeed that's my field, so I do a lot of lecturing in that, but believe me, it's not about just the speed of data and a quantum of data. It's about what you can extract from data, and sometimes tiny little bit of data, such as few minutes of trading, give you more information than the entire stock market data for a year. It's very interesting in that way. By the way, extracting in finance data and ability to act on that data is illustrated by that picture. It's not a distorted view. It actually is the Oculus Rift trading platform, the virtual reality trading platform, which is currently being used. So an interface between us as traders, as human beings, and technology is becoming more and more and more direct in that field. We're ahead of all of you. You're going to follow. You're going to encounter the world in which people make decisions in nanoseconds. They're going to use technology in terms of powering their decisions, and you have to reflect that. They are data naturals. In a world of data naturals, what do you have? You have expectations, which are formed very fast and very fleeting, and you have the speed of decisions, which is very fast as well. And you have individuals who hold data naturally. You're going to have an address the challenge of how do you create a trust that that data that they hold is theirs. It's not about just security of data. It's not about just hacking into data. It's not about just online systems. It is actually about you convincing your customers that they are the owners of themselves, that they own the data, not some big company owns the data, that you interact with them recognizing the value of that data that they own. That's a huge challenge, by the way, because right now we don't have that. We're going to have an exchange, financial style exchange, like stock exchange for data, where I can list my data to you, and you can pay me to use my data. And I will have a full control whom I choose. And you will have a full control of how much you bid. And we're going to settle. That's what trust capital is about. I'm going to skip this and go straight to the last one because I'm literally out of time now, but I do want to link this to you. What I'm talking about here is that the technology, even today, is not an end in itself. The technology is just a vehicle which transforms you and transitions you from being close to your customers today to getting closer to your customers tomorrow. And I'm not going to talk about today. I'm not going to talk about past. I thought about doing that originally, but let's jump straight to the tomorrow. Your tomorrow's challenge in the retail and consumer services sector is not about getting more technology into the sector and into your offer. It is about recognizing that you're no longer competing within your category. Groceries retailers do not compete with grocery retailers. Car retailers don't compete with car retailers. Legal services retailers do not compete with legal services retailers. You're competing across. My best experience with a car dealer informs what I expect from my lawyer. My best experience with lawyer, or the worst experience with lawyer, informs me what I'm going to avoid when I go to a retailer in a grocery store, and so forth. That's a different model of retailing. That's a different model of competition. Some of you already are doing that, by the way. But it is a big challenge for a lot of you will be. Before 2020, competition itself, the space, becomes singular. That whole process, the idea of different segments of retail is going to disappear. There will be still specialization, but that specialization will only be there to deliver the better experience or as good of an experience as the best performer in every other possible sector of retail and consumer services. But by 2030, I predict that something will happen which is even more dramatic. Because of the 4D printing, ability to use individual data, establish and trust capital, establishing the systems which will transmit my consumer design to you, the executioner of that design. Because of the personalized logistics and delivery, I will become producer. I will be sending you an order of what I want in that particular piece of clothing, in this particular unit of entertainment, in this particular system of software, and things like that. It is the geek's dream to have Mathematica combined with MATLAB together with a Stata. You don't know what it is, but good. Okay, you don't need to. It's just applied software, yes? I want them to be combined. By 2030, I will have power to order them to be combined. And you will have to execute. That means that by 2030, the world will look like that. That's the economic world will look like that. This distorted map, where the gravity center is there of the world economy, and here. And our traditional focal points of the global economy are drifting away, becoming smaller and smaller. This is a map of X billion consumers who will inhabit Earth in age 2030, distributed by different countries where they're going to live. But that is also a map of X billion producers by 2030. That's an entirely different world from the one we've seen today, where there are few producers supplying many consumers, few retailers supplying many consumers. So you're going to have to get ready for that. I'll stop at that. Thanks a lot for your attention, and I hope it was interesting.